Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. This week we're going to be talking all about influencers. Now, most of you may well have heard of the most mainstream influencers. We're talking like Ronaldo here or Kylie Jenner, but there's a whole market out there for B2B influencers. And that's what I and my fantastic colleague Ollie are going to chat to you about today. So first of all, Hi Ollie, great to see you today with your surfer dude friend.
Yep. Yeah, I'm in the office today. Nice scenery around me.
So let's talk about B2B influencers, because whenever we talk to businesses, they go, oh, it's only for B2C, 9 times out of 10, don't they? But there are B2B influencers out there. So let's educate the world on what B2B influencers are first of all. But I think what it might be a useful place to start is actually, what is an influencer? Let's just outline for everybody what an influencer is, so everyone's clear on what an influencer is, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so it's better to start at the beginning and then work our way forward. So an influencer is not dissimilar to what it says on the tin. It's anyone who influences somebody else to do something or to think in a certain way. The way I like to think about it and describe it to people when I'm training or to clients is social media is very reflective of society, and in the same way that somebody down the pub might influence you by saying that the plumber they used recently is the best one they've used so far, you're then influenced that next time you need a plumber, you're going to go to them, and a lot of that is like is social proof. That's what they tend to call it. So people buy what other people recommend, because us as consumers, you know, yourself and I, when we're searching the web, when we're looking at TV, even when we're in the shops, we'd much prefer to buy something that somebody else tells us to buy, because we trust a human more than we trust a bit of marketing material like a TV advert or an ad in the paper. So that's really what an influencer is. They promote products, services, something like that to their followers, whether they have loads or just a few thousand, whatever it might be. And that influences you as a consumer to maybe read more about something, educate yourself, or even lead to a purchase as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when it comes to influence, you know, influence has been around ever since human beings have been around. We've always been influenced by other people. It's just the human ingrained instinct that we have. Like you say, if you're down a pub, or you're just asking a friend, like, where to get a wedding dress from. But the same applies in business, but for some weird and wonderful reason, probably because it's not covered in the press as much, or it isn't as high profile as the consumer-based stuff, there is the whole B2B market. And I read a stat recently, and I would absolutely agree with it. I think it's about 91% of businesses are influenced by other businesses' decisions. So we're much more likely, as you in your role or in my role, to be influenced by other business people when we're making decisions, whether it be for software or for jobs or for using an agency or anything like that. So why do you think it's underutilized to begin with?
I think because firstly, I think people don't really know that it can be a thing, or if they do know that it's a thing, they don't really know how to do it. And I think that's the biggest thing between the B2C and the B2B markets. Is the B2C, as you've rightly said, is far more covered in the media, and it's far more covered in the media, and the figures, particularly the financial figures associated with them, are often staggering to most people, and therefore it gets an awful lot more coverage. Yeah. But what it's worth noting is even in the B2B space, some of these, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about it in just a moment, some of these B2B influencers are paid just as much, if not more, for providing influence to their followers to buy a product or service. And the reason for that, I'm sure, is something that we'll come on to in just a moment.
Yeah. Well, that moves us nicely on to actually, what is a B2B, like who are the B2B influencers? So let's elaborate on that and explore that so people can be more educated on what a B2B influencer is.
Yeah, of course. So I break it down into two groups, typically when I'm delivering training on influencers. And that is the thought leader group and the internal influencer group. And we're going to start talking about the thought leader group because that's probably closer to the B2C marketing method. And that is where there's thought leaders in industry, and it doesn't matter what industry that is. For you and I, it's people in the marketing industry, and then the industries of our clients as well. But for others, it could be in the dancing industry, and others, it could be in the real estate industry. There are always thought leaders and just leaders in general, because thought leaders has become a little bit of a commonly used phrase, used for all kinds of things. But leaders within industries are respected. They've potentially worked incredibly hard to get where they are. They're in positions of authority. And therefore, people that are potentially not in those positions of authority, whether, to use an example, the marketing industry, there are people running huge global marketing agencies around the world, and I would be influenced if one of those people said, I use this product to help me with my marketing. Yeah. I would be influenced by that because I trust them, I respect their opinion, and they're talking to me from a place of authority, and I trust what they're saying, and therefore I might lead to go and make a purchase. Now, whether they've actively promoted what they are recommending me to buy, or whether they are simply just sharing it out of the goodness of their heart, is a conversation that obviously is between them and the business. But in lots of examples, they are going to be paid in some sort of way. Sometimes affiliate links, that's quite common in the B2B space, particularly with sales tools and things like that. And then to flip that on its head, we're going to talk about internal influencers. And the way that I like to talk about them is within any organization. If I'm trying to make a B2B sale, I need to be talking to the key decision makers. Now, that's not always the easiest thing to do. In fact, often it's quite difficult because certainly in big organizations, or organizations where they just have a really, really hierarchical structure, they're impossible to get to, whether they're not on LinkedIn or they just won't pick up the phone. Now, an internal influencer is someone who is inside of that bubble, so they're inside of that company that I'm trying to sell to, and they have influence over the decision maker. And it's a weird thing to sort of get your head around, because as marketing goes, we want to market to the one person that we're trying to sell to. That's who it makes sense to try and talk to. Not in this case. So what we're going to do, we're going to tailor our marketing material to these internal people. They might be executives rather than directors. Yeah. They might be managers rather than CEOs. But what they are is people who can have those conversations internally and recommend what I'm trying to sell to them. And that's really what an internal influencer is.
Yeah. And I think with those external influencers, so the thought leaders, or the leaders as you call them, I think people often get misunderstood when it comes to influencers, because they go, well, if I Google B2B influencers, I don't find them. Well, they don't. In the B2C world, there's a huge percentage, I think it's about 60% of B2C influencers have actually set themselves up to actually be commercial influencers. Where people in business, we don't set ourselves up to be influencers, we just set ourselves up in business to do very good business, but actually inadvertently, we are influencers. So like you say, when I do my YouTube lives, like people go, oh, we know what software you're using. I'm not getting paid for that. I'm just giving it as value, but actually I'm influencing that decision, because people go, well, if she's been doing it for 20 odd years, then I want to know what she's been using, rather than Googling the system. So I think it's really important for people to think about, okay, if those thought leaders, not to go Googling influencers, but actually think about, okay, who is the thought leader in that sector? And they could be on a podcast like we are today, or YouTube video like we're also on today, or they could be writing blog content, or they could be talking at conferences. It's thinking about who those people get in front of at the end of the day, isn't it? Is that probably the best way to summarize it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the key thing to think about when doing that is you might not even realize that they're a leader in your industry, because they're just someone that you follow and they share relevant useful content. But actually, if you take a step back from being someone who consumes their content and think about being sort of put a marketing hat on or a sales hat on rather than a consumer's hat on, and really think about the fact that they've worked really hard to get to, it might not even be their social following. So there's two different kinds of leaders. I know we're breaking the groups down quite a little bit, but hopefully I'll explain it. So within thought leaders, or industry leaders, let's call them industry leaders, there's two groups. There are leaders that have become leaders because of their social following and their following. And there's plenty of those on LinkedIn at the moment. I see lots of content about people sort of tooting their own horn, saying how many views they get. They get millions of impressions on their LinkedIn posts. And that's great. And they have then become industry leaders because millions of those people are following them for tips and tricks in marketing. That's certainly what my LinkedIn looks like. But I'm sure there's others that are around sales and others that are around potentially like a state agency or all of those different bubbles. Now, those guys might not actually be the most experienced in the industry, but what they've been very good at is building their personal brand, and therefore they've become these leaders of the industry. Then the other group are kind of like, not necessarily the opposite, but they're a little bit different. They're leaders in the industry because of their job title or their position in a certain company, or maybe even their experience in a given industry. So examples like that would be people senior at Google, people senior at Facebook, those kind of things. And they're not necessarily the people with the biggest personal brands, but if they were to go and talk at an exhibition, people would listen because they know that they know their stuff. Yeah. And that's the thing. So they're the two kinds of groups within thought leaders. You've on one hand, you've got not necessarily the most experienced, but certainly the people with the most eyes on their content, and arguably potentially quite a lot of influence. Equally, on the other hand, you've got the people that are senior in a given organization, hold a senior position and experience. They're influential because everyone less experienced than them is going to want to follow in their footsteps, or at least listen and try to get down the path that they're going down.
Yeah. And there's lots of, if I just think about the examples that we've got, like we don't do, like we haven't, we have actually received. So Spark Toro is a good example of influence. So Spark Toro, run by Rand Fishkin, definitely worth going to check out. Spark Toro system that is used. He reached out and emailed, no, he didn't email. He reached out via social media, and because I'm connected with him, and said, I've got this new product coming out, would really like some reviews on it, honest reviews. If you're interested, do X, Y, and Z. And I was like, well, yeah, I want to have a look because I hold you in high regard. So dropped him an email, and he said, yep, here's access for however many days. And I did a review, and it was a nice review. I didn't get anything out of it. I got free access for a week, and that was fine. But ultimately, he got a review, he got some feedback, and he got some brand awareness. So yes, it wasn't done in the normal sense of influence in terms of you identify your audience, but actually through his connections on LinkedIn, he garnered influence from people like me and loads of other people of much more high authority than me, just in little quiet Norfolk in the UK. But that's just one example. And then actually for people that are listening today or watching today, it's probably also worth going back to listen to our podcast or video with Paul Kirby, because he's very influential in the electric vehicle sector and is very loves going on video. Definitely check him out on LinkedIn. Gets loads of engagement and actually has a lot of authority, and has progressed his career really well from someone that being really nervous on camera. He had no intent to sort of be some sort of EV celebrity, but has almost ended up as an EV celebrity through his passion and want and knowledge for things. So he would be seen as an influencer in that sector. So if people are thinking about how they could approach B2B influencers, what would be your top tips, Ollie, do you think?
So it's a little bit different than the way that you would approach a B2C. So if you're trying to sell a t-shirt or something quite like an impulse buy or direct to consumer, essentially. B2B influencer marketing is often a longer process, because in the exact same way that a B2B decision is a lot longer process, the influence that you have to sway people in is a longer process. So what I see a lot of, and big tech companies certainly as a great example that do this, like Dell, the likes of Dell, and Microsoft, they'll sign these really influential people, and whether it is party one or party two of these thought leaders or industry leaders, they sign these maybe 6 or 12-month contracts, almost like a brand partner, essentially, rather than a typical influencer. And the advantages of that are the fact that the followers of those influential people are going on the journey with the influencer. It's not just a buy this software now. It's a I've downloaded the software. This is my experience of it. This is how it's going. This is how I'm using it. This is how it's helping me. And that's really important for B2B decision making, because B2B decision making isn't a quick process. It might be a quick process to get it stuck in your head, but to actually click the buy now button, or when we're pitching even for training, when we're pitching for retained work, all of these big marketing decisions, they're not happening super quickly just through social media. And that's probably worth mentioning as well. B2B marketing isn't necessarily always to do with social media. There might be aspects of using these influential leaders of industry in other ways. So getting them onto your podcast, like as you rightly said earlier, or featuring a blog on your site, on their site, all of these different things that will feed into the decision-making process. Ultimately, what you're trying to do is keep your brand or your product or your service front of mind to your consumer for as long as possible through that decision-making process. You can't just give them the idea and let them have it. You've got to nurture it. You've got to let the idea grow, really let it mature in their head, and then hopefully they'll make a purchase at the either end of that campaign or even during it.
Yeah. Okay. Any other hints and tips on identifying and approaching and working with B2B influencers, do you think?
I think be reflective of yourself. If you're looking for influencers to promote your own product or service, be reflective of yourself. Who in the industry do you admire? Do you look up to? Do you know has influence over yourself? And then, but equally, if you're doing it on behalf of a client, think about the types of people that are really senior in the industry, and either contact them directly or engage with the content they're putting out, engage with their products, engage with their services, and be active, but be constructively active. Don't just, and this is something that I delivered a training session just recently, and we were discussing commenting on influencers' posts, and is it just okay to just put an emoji? And B2B is, B2C, that's not appropriate, but B2C, it's definitely, B2B, it's definitely not appropriate. B2B is all about providing value. You've got to show that the product or service that you are trying to sell ultimately is valuable, and therefore the influencer, thought leader, whatever you want to call them, should want to promote it to their audience because it is valuable. And that's the biggest thing.
Yeah. And I think with business to business, it's very much about people, and people buy from people. So very much building relationships with people. So if there's people, like you say, you do admire, or people that you think actually they're my target audience, but be genuine and authentic. And you said about that earlier about, they have authority, but they're also very authentic. And much like on the B2C side of things, B2B would be the same. Like, you can't say, here's a product review and I want you to say this and I want you to say that. Like, they have their own thoughts and opinions. And if you're asking them to review a product, so it might be a smaller campaign, you're asking them to review a product, you need to be willing to take constructive criticism or bad reviews and good reviews. And Spark Toro, I was very complimentary, but I said, there's this thing, I'm sure it's a work in progress. And he's like, yeah, valid comment, we are working on that. But people want transparency. Like, as a business owner, we know that things aren't always perfect. So I guess in summary, it's thinking about just looking at the bare basics. So for people that haven't done influencer marketing before, having a strategy and think, what do we want to get out of this in an ideal situation? with any influencer, nothing's guaranteed, whether you pay them. And obviously if you're paying them or gifting them or anything like that, you need to fully disclose it, because only about 17% of influencers are disclosing stuff correctly. So make sure you're abiding by the guidelines, whether it's B2B or B2C. And then, like you've said, you know, just nurturing that relationship and making the most of it. And, you know, you can't use probably tools for identifying B2B influencers. You're very much aimed at doing manually, I'd guess. That's how I would think to do it.
Yeah, so there are tools out there that help you find influencers in a broader space. Yeah. But for B2B, I would always recommend that manual approach. I know that might be a little bit strenuous for some marketers out there, but it really is worth it. And relying on your own intuition as well. So much of that goes so much of that is just wasted in marketing agencies at the moment, I feel. And it's something that I've touched on in training before, that marketers are so keen for tools to help them streamline their processes, but actually, you know, you've got to where you are in your career because you're talented at marketing and you've got a good gut instinct and you've got that sixth sense of what is going to work. And particularly with B2B, I think there's a real opportunity for you to feel your way through it and pick the influencers that you want to work with based on that, not based on X tool told me that this is the right person. You know, there is a place for that, certainly, but I think with B2B, it's more of a relationship, and it's more of you integrating yourself with the influencer integrating themselves with your business, and they almost just become an ambassador for your business. And they really do champion your product and service rather than it feeling like an empty advert.
Yeah. And I think tools are worth mentioning because, like you've said, you know, and I always say, like, tools like this telephone, it's only ever good if you know who you're trying to contact, what you want to get out of it, what you want to say. If not, it's just a bit of electronic gizmo, isn't it? So a tool can't do everything. A tool can give you some data, but it can't give you the data and it can't give you the intelligence. And like you say, you know, your gut instinct. We've done a few B2B campaigns, including one for, actually it was B2B to influence B2C. And it was on LinkedIn. We did it all manually. So we love good old Excel sheets, identifying who our target audience is, what we're trying to achieve and what the overall aim is. And we were then able to run actually LinkedIn campaigns to target these people who were of influence, make them aware of something, and actually then get them to do something, which in B2C, you wouldn't normally see that in influencer marketing, I don't think, but in B2B, it is possible potentially in some cases to do that. And that was hugely successful, but it was a very manual process. Like, there's a lot more identifying who the influencers are. And in that situation, the company we worked with, they'd originally thought, oh, well, you know, our influencers have always been the media. And I was like, well, there's other media out there now since you last ran that campaign. Actually, there's influencers, people who are like journalists, as it were, because everyone's a journalist at the end of the day, actually on social. So look at here and here and here. And it was hugely successful and very, very cost effective. We didn't have to pay the influencers anything. All we had to do was, obviously there was our costs and then the advertising costs to get in front of these people. But I think the success rate was like, you know, 40 to 50% of the people we reached out to actually then did what we wanted them to, and actually we then changed their mind on something, and they then influenced actually the myths that were going out to the consumers, and eradicated that. So hugely successful. So lots of insight today on B2B influencers. Ollie, anything else you want to share before we wrap up today's session?
No, I think the key thing just to remember is that it is a possibility. So when you hear the phrase influencer marketing, don't just think that's not relevant to me. Because even if you are a B2B company, obviously if you're a B2C company, you probably already know that it's a very, very realistic objective to add into a realistic tool to add to your marketing sort of repertoire. But on the B2B side, too many marketers are just writing it off and then focusing on LinkedIn InMail or something like that, when actually you could be really generating some quality business by leveraging the influence of someone in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said at the beginning, like, every human being is influenced by other people. So it doesn't matter if they're a consumer or a business person, they're still a human being at the end of the day, aren't they? So they all have the facility to be influenced. So thank you so much for your insight today, Ollie. As always, lots of great insight and lovely to chat to you. If anybody wants any more insight on influencer marketing, we've got lots of resources on our website, so go and check it out, which is socialb.co.uk. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thanks very much, Ollie.
No worries.